Mahatma Gandhi was the charismatic leader of Indian nationalism when India was part of the British Empire and firmly under British rule. Using nonviolent civil disobedience, Gandhi led India to independence and inspired civil rights movements all over the world. He would become a major influence on Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King discovered Gandhi through Bayard Rustin, who introduced him to Gandhi's methods. Bayard Rustin was a controversial veteran civil rights activist who served as Dr. King's main advisor and mentor throughout his early years of activism. He became influential in Dr. King's adoption of peaceful resistance as a definitive strategy. Although Dr. King already believed in adhering to a higher law and turning the other cheek, he had yet to use civil disobedience as a strategic weapon in his fight against Jim Crow laws and widespread discrimination. Rustin had studied Gandhi's teachings and Christian pacifism, and he counseled Dr. King to dedicate himself to the principles of nonviolence. Rustin later helped Dr. King to organize the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC. The original goal for the SCLC was the desegregation of bus systems throughout the South, but the conference provided a framework for dozens of civil rights initiatives and remains a relevant voice on racial issues to this day. Dr. King was so inspired by Gandhi's success with nonviolent activism that he became a devoted student. He referred to Gandhi as the guiding light of our technique of nonviolent social change.
Everybody was talking about Mohandas K. Gandhi and how he stood up to the British Empire, the most powerful military force in the world. And he overcame that force without any weapons, but with moral force or truth force or soul force. Those were the terms that were used for nonviolence. It had to influence all of us, but most of us, I remember when I read Gandhi the first time, I was really not all that excited about, I just did not know that it could work here in the United States.
In February of 1959, Dr. King and his wife Coretta set off on a 5-week trip to India to study Gandhi's methods in more depth. Dr. King was well received in India, where the Montgomery bus boycott had received extensive coverage. He was impressed by the supportive response he received in India.
Speaking about his trip to India, Dr. King said this: "The people of India showered upon us the most generous hospitality imaginable. Almost every door was open so that our party was able to see some of India's most important social experiments and talk with leaders in and out of government, ranging from Prime Minister Nehru to village councilmen. We were looked upon as brothers with the color of our skins as something of an asset. But the strongest bond of fraternity was the common cause of minority and colonial peoples in America, Africa, and Asia, struggling to throw off racialism and imperialism."
The time that Dr. King spent in India deepened his understanding of nonviolent resistance and reinforced his commitment to America's struggle to establish civil rights through peaceful methods. During his final evening in India, Dr. King gave a radio address. In it, he said that since being in India, he had become more convinced than ever that the method of nonviolent resistance was the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for justice and human dignity. Dr. King's admiration of Gandhi's peaceful protest and civil disobedience did not diminish in later years. Peaceful resistance became the hallmark of Dr. King's civil rights activism. Most of the movement's leaders abided by Dr. King's example of nonviolent activism, but some believe that breaking any law was a violation of biblical commands to obey civil authorities. But many more shared Dr. King's belief that any law contradicting eternal truths were not just laws. Such laws could be disregarded in acts of civil disobedience, as long as the actions taken were strictly nonviolent. When segregationists hurled stones and bottles at civil rights marchers, they did not throw them back. When municipal fire hoses were turned on young people, the youngsters did not turn to fight. Even when German shepherds were set upon children, the protesters remained nonviolent. Tactics of civil disobedience included demonstrations, marches, and sit-ins at segregated restaurants and department stores. Demonstrators joined arms and sang protest songs with tunes borrowed from gospel hymns. They could be heard praying aloud as police loaded them into paddy wagons. Some moderates chided the activists for these tactics, but even a Supreme Court victory had failed to bring about change in a timely manner. These protesters had learned about humanity while sitting in church pews, and if they needed to sit at forbidden lunch counters to make others respect that humanity, that's what they would do. The images of nonviolent protesters and innocent children being hosed, jeered at, and beaten without retaliating incited national leaders to put an end to segregation once and for all. The disenfranchised had had enough of being separate and unequal, so they willingly broke local laws in service of what Dr. King and his fellow Christians regarded as a higher law. The principles that gave the civil rights movement its momentum are still valid today. It can be argued that there's an even greater need for societies all over the world to adhere to those principles and take determined action to apply them. And yet, one question remains.